All right. Hey, guys. So thanks, everyone. This is our second episode of Unity Now, a podcast where we explore the ideas, perspectives, and people of the Unity 2020 movement. I'm your host, Nick Carey. And today I have two very special guests for our episode. Last week, we had a nice panel of some Unity volunteers. But this week, we wanted to bring on some team leads, individuals that are doing really great work for the Unity 2020 movement. I have Alex and Chris with us today, and we're going to really kind of explore what this plan to save America really is all about. And so I think what we're going to first start off with, Alex and Chris, if you were walking down the street and someone asked you, hey, what the heck is Unity? I keep seeing it everywhere. What would you say? Let's start with Alex.
Cool. I would say that we're a movement that is aimed at connecting people across gaps that we have in our society. So there are a lot of people on both sides of the political spectrum who maybe hold some differing opinions, but the majority of their opinions overlap in a really significant way, mainly in the fact that they're just people who want to live their lives and live in the beautiful country and prosperity that we have in this world. And we're a movement that is trying to bring together that majority that's in the middle of both sides of the political spectrum, and connect people to be able to take back our country and not live in this divisive way, and ideally have someone in office who represents the ideals of coming together and learning from each other and growing, moving forwards as a country that's united.
Absolutely. I think the point of, again, it's in the name, unity, right? It's trying to bring everyone from all different backgrounds to realize there's a lot more common ground out there than I think a lot of us, especially those that are tied into Twitter or the media, like to think. Chris, how about you?
I think unity is just, it's a movement that's basically saying the emperor has no clothes, and everyone can sort of see this. And it's, I think, a commonly held view. And we're all coming together and say we have more in common than we have in differences. And we just need to reaffirm the values that I think we all believe in as Americans, to say, hey, you know what, we can have discussions with nuance, and that we need our discussions to have nuance that match the complexity of the issues we're trying to solve.
Absolutely. So I think one of the things I see all the time, when I'm on Twitter or just kind of listening to other people that are exploring Unity for the first time, is what makes Unity different from, say, like another, maybe a third party run, such as the Green Party or so on and so forth. So as team leads, all of us are team leads, right? And what our goal right now is really trying to flesh out the organization and helping us build that groundswell. So what do you guys think differentiates the Unity movement from, say, the Green Party or other conventional third party runs? Do you guys feel like this is really a third party run, or do you think it's something that transcends that structure?
Right. So I think with other parties, right, they have a specific sort of prescription of solutions to problems that they've sort of identified. And I think what makes Unity unique is we're saying there's actually something foundationally that we need to address first, which is we have extreme polarization and we have a current political apparatus that drives that polarization for its own interests. And we're saying, no, we reject this flat out. The choices that we're given now for president are unacceptable. And we can all look at each other and sort of agree to this. And you look at the noise on social media, and no one's happy, right? We're all sort of equivocating for justification of different choices, but we're not gung-ho about these choices. And Unity is saying, no, we should live in a world where people feel good about the choices they're making.
Yeah. I think that there's also a really important point that you bring up, Chris, which is we're looking at a world of social media, and this is kind of this Unity 2020 is rising out of this alternative media space. And I think that I just watched a podcast between Andrew Yang and a guest of his, and I don't remember exactly what his name is at the moment, but they were saying how Facebook seems to be moving towards something more like a country than a platform. It's more it regulates itself. It has its own kind of set of rules, and it can control what people say, and its algorithms control so many different parts of our minds and our lives, and um, every part of ourselves. And I think that what's happening in Unity 2020 is actually this kind of emergence of this conversation into the political sphere of us realizing that we have to use this technology and work with this technology that we now are experiencing and interacting with more than we even are outside with the current crisis that's been happening in the world. So there's a real need for that deeper level conversation of, Chris, how we have that conversation and find our commonalities, but there's also a need for a conversation to rise where suddenly the people can take back a large portion of the disproportionate power in government through these alternative media sources, because we can kind of all have a voice now.
So I think it's interesting you bring up that especially over the last like 10 years, right? There's been such this emergence of alternative media and the role of social media in the political system. I think obviously we see in 2016, social media had a massive influence on the 2016 election, right? Both campaigns spent billions of dollars to try and operate different ads and really strategically, right? Do you feel that the role of social media and as a forum of discourse and as a way to bring people together, especially politically, is viable? Because, I mean, a lot of the algorithms that are built, especially on Twitter and other social media platforms, are designed to help people find their own small echo chambers and communities. And often they help drive divisiveness, right? So as the unity movement, right, before anything, our goal is to help try and reunify this country. How do we fight that inherent systemic component of social media?
Yeah, I think that's a really important. I think that's a really important point, and I think that what we're engaged in is trying to figure out how to do that, and it's almost like we need to use that system in order to be able to have the conversation about that system. Because if there's one thing that we know about the current political duopoly that's in place, and we can unpack that term, it's that they're not having the real conversations about the real problems that exist in the world today. And this, I would say, the social media rising, that's really, if you think about it, the iPhone was released. The first iPhone was released in 2007. It was only what, 13 years ago. That's not a very long time. And the rise of the technology that's extrapolated from that really needs to be addressed in a really real way. And our government has been falling short for a while now in doing that. And so I don't know if I have an answer to your question, but I would say that the answer is that yes, that needs to absolutely be addressed. And I hope that's something that through using that platform to grow a movement can be addressed in a much more significant way.
Yeah. Let me take a take at this. So I think culture, language, technology, and politics, they're all a complex adaptive system that have interactions with each other, right? And as one of those things might change, it can change the others a little bit, right? But I do think that they're sort of at different layers of a substrate. So I think culture is more foundational than politics, right? And so I think what we've seen is a degradation in our politics because we've had changes in our culture that we haven't quite figured out how to contend with. And I think technology sort of intermediated that change. But I think, we can talk about social media and saying that, like, oh, people are just angry at each other, and the posts that get shown more are the ones that have more engagement, and people are just getting triggered and responding to the posts that trigger them, right? And so there's, I think, a reckoning that needs to happen there, sort of saying, you know what, I don't need to fight every battle on Facebook with all my friends. Maybe it's just a one-to-one connection I need to develop with someone, and let's have a long form conversation, right? And I think what's been so great about sort of technology and as it pertains to just media and distribution in general is you're seeing these podcasts that are 3 hours long that are just getting incredible engagement, right? And that's really exciting, right? Because we've been saying forever that the public can't pay attention to anything that is a long form, and the most popular podcasts in the world are 3 hours plus, right? So I think we're experiencing a lot of changes rapidly in a lot of different dimensions, and we have to sort of contend with that. And one thing that's I think we're really struggling with is we don't have the same institutions that we depended on for sense making, right, on a global scale, right? Like the brands that we used to depend on very heavily for saying this is the general consensus of the way the world is working right now and the shape of things. People have no faith in, not, I don't want to say no faith, but those institutions have completely eroded in terms of their public trust, right? And we keep talking about fake news now, and fake news is not necessarily this term that means like the news is fake. It means something a little bit more complex than that, and we're still sorting out what that means. And I think until we sort that out, we're still gonna have this sort of rub up against people just having completely different views of what is happening. And I think the key to sort of gracefully settling this is reaffirming what does disagreement look like and how do you resolve that, right? What is productive conflict? And there's a lot of literature out there that talks about this. There's a great TED talk on being wrong, and one of the things that the speaker talks about is what does it feel like to be wrong? And you might say, oh, shame or embarrassment, but that's not the feeling of being wrong. That's the feeling of finding out you were wrong. The feeling of being wrong until you find out is the same as being right, right? It's Wile E. Coyote chasing Roadrunner going off the cliff, and before he looks down, he thinks he's fine, right? The minute he looks down, that's when he falls, right? So I think we need to get very good at this. In my day job, I deal with working with teams and reorganizing companies and things like that. And this is one of the key components of making teams good, right? And I think that's what we need to do as a society.
Absolutely. So I think they're all great points where I feel like fundamentally there needs to be, especially as a movement, as Unity 2020, we need to really be strategic with how we are introducing concepts and then how we're framing them, right? Because if we kind of come out of the gate saying all of these high level things, people are either going to not get it, they're gonna be like, I don't know what's going on, or we're going to capture maybe a small market of people. So, Alex, I know you work right now in our marketing and kind of research group, and I'd love to know your thoughts. We hear all the time, if you're a follower of the Unity movement, we hear our number one goal right now is to build this groundswell. But of course, a groundswell can mean so many different things, right? That could mean we want to get 1,000 people in the streets tomorrow. We want to get 1,000 Twitter followers, retweeting. Kind of going off of Chris's points, what does this groundswell look like, and what do you think it needs to look like in order for a movement like Unity to be successful in our goal of 2020?
Well, I'll take something that I heard one of our other members of our leadership team, Seth, talk about, where he said that and I can't quote the exact study, but he was saying that there's been a study that's done that when 3.5% of a population connects to an issue or becomes a part of a movement, then that movement never fails. So that was based on statistics around the American Revolution, the Civil Rights Movement, and different kinds of big shifts in public consciousness. So, and he said that 3.5% of our population, I think, is 12 million people. So that's kind of like I might be wrong on that number, but I'm pretty sure that's what I remember. And that's kind of like a benchmark for maybe what we're looking at in terms of groundswell. In order to get there, I think that it's a really complex issue because, like you say, communicating these ideas is so different from person to person and group to group. But there are a lot of groups out there who really would resonate with this idea, would connect with this idea if we only could reach them in the right way. And those are groups from, church groups around the country. I think that there's a lot of, if not religious, then at least spiritual connection to the idea of unity. It's a very fundamental idea in most of those circles, and bringing people together, not dividing people apart, should be fundamental to religion, and in a lot of cases is. So how do we communicate it to that group of people? And we're working on trying to curate our messaging towards that, or on a more, I guess, liberal side. How do you communicate this message to people who are very afraid to speak out outside of their own bubble, outside of their own social media group, where they went to a liberal arts college, they're seeing a lot of very divisive content being pushed at them, and they don't necessarily agree with all of it. They probably agree with most of it, but they feel very conflicted about some of it, and probably want more than anything to not have to be in the constant state of back and forth, of feeling anxiety around it. So how do we reach them and not make them feel more scared, but actually make them feel less scared and feel hopeful that this is something that could work and could actually bring about a positive change in the issues that they care about, as well as in the issues that they're afraid to talk about.
Do you feel like there are certain issues that, and by the way, I think that's a great point. I mean, our last episode, which by the way is on our YouTube channel and Spotify, and if you haven't checked it out, definitely should. We had this long conversation about the political atmosphere of universities, which I think is, that's such a belabored point anyways. You hear it all the time, but it's very true. And I think one of the biggest things probably stopping people is that fear of like, well, if I bring this up, I'm going to get shot down. Because people are going to be like, hey, like, what are you doing? You're going to possibly blow this, right? The Democrats are going to say, you support this idea, you're going to get Trump reelected, right? And the Republicans are going to say the same thing for Joe Biden. And there's so much fear, right? Like everything is so rooted in this all or nothing concern that people just feel like they have to take sides, as if like we mess up, we're going to have a civil war. But when in reality, what we really probably need to do, right, is actually come together and unify. That's what's actually going to help us prevent, God forbid, some massive disaster. What are we doing right now as a movement? We've been working now. Our movement's pretty young, and I always try to tell people and remind people, like, hey, we just started. This movement came out. I mean, I think the Joe Rogan podcast with Brett Weinstein was about a month ago. We're really new, and we've already done a lot of great work. We have 1,500 people on our Slack. I see all the time when I'm on it, like people are creating all these great videos and content and memes and ideas. So I'd love to kind of transition us to talk about what are we doing right now to kind of prepare ourselves to build this really complex groundswell to reach these 10 or 15 million people that we need to reach.
We're doing a number of things. Nick, as you said, we started very recently, and just sort of seeing a group of people emerge out of the groundswell of support to sort of help wherever help is needed, and sort of give direction and focus and sense making for others within a month, right? And so one of the things we focused on early on was investing in this idea of spinning up teams that can run somewhat autonomously, but all in the same direction, right? And still remaining very well synced with each other. And now we're starting to see content production pipelines take place. And, this beautiful background behind me is one of our artists. And they're just churning out so much stuff. And the video production as well. This podcast, right? You just started this up. And it's great. And so that's from the sort of volunteer side of things, is all these structures are getting put up very quickly in people's spare times. Like I have a full-time job, other people have full-time jobs, people are, differing levels of employment as well. And so all this is volunteer work, and it's blazingly fast. So we have movement from the groundswell already happening to try to build more groundswell, and people are talking with their friends. And then there is a series of campfires that are going to take place, as Brett called them, and it's going to look very similar to the sort of roundtable, this intellectual roundtable that he had. Is my understanding. And the idea is it's going to be a regular series of demonstrating what good looks like in these sort of difficult, highly nuanced sort of conversations that have just a minefield everywhere, right? And those conversations are hard to traverse unless it's all good faith and it's both parties seeing we're trying our best. And I think this is wonderful as a model for showing the public this is what you can do as a habit in your everyday life, right? And this is what we should expect from our institutions, right? Once people see what good looks like, then you know what to do and you know what to ask of others. And, I think the real opportunity for us is to say, hey, we're having these sort of debates, public debates regularly in a way that neither Joe Biden or Donald Trump seem to be able to agree to have one of. So, I think it'll be night and day to show the difference of what something that works looks like versus what we currently have.
Yeah, absolutely. And to that point, I think that the other thing that is happening, and we're actively involved in doing this right now and in our Slack and among people, is having these debates. And I would go as far as to call them dialogues rather than debates, because I think a dialogue is generative and has a purpose of coming to a consensus. And it's actually very easy to change your mind and come to different perspectives on an issue. And that's really what we need in the complex times we're living in, like you're saying, Chris, for sense making. And so, yeah, I think the more we're able to do that, and I think until this pandemic hit, we were often very much in our own lives, in our job, in our world, and we would type something on Facebook or on Twitter. And since we've all been on Zoom and in these forums like this, it's much easier to be open to that kind of dialogue. And I think the more we can push for that, the better that state of affairs can be.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I'll just add.
I think one of the things, and we're going to touch on this. Oh, sure, go for it, Chris.
Yeah, I'll just add very quickly that the more, like, once Unity started, I stopped going on Facebook, and my life's been kind of better for it because I've stopped sort of like arguing with people and just doing it more face to face. And I recommend during particularly these times, have phone calls with friends and family, particularly with people that you don't see normally or like are in constant contact with. They want to hear from you. I know this from personal experience with the people I've been talking to. And I think those connections are vital right now. And sort of tying this back to the idea of the groundswell, Mr. Rogers, sort of later on in his career, he was retelling how his mother sort of told him how to deal with crisis. In moments of crisis is to look for the helpers. And I think that's what Unity is. Those are the helpers. These are the helpers, right? And so if you're looking for a sense of hope when something might feel bleak, look for the helpers and join them.
Absolutely. And it's funny because I really look at personally when I kind of first found the Unity movement, I feel like it was something like this was going to happen, right? Because the last 6 months have been so divisive, even in our own lives, right? All of a sudden, we're split physically from our friends and our family, and
Yeah.
it's a very difficult from a mental health perspective, but also inherently divisive time. Not only has it been from the pandemic, but also right now with all of the issues related right now to systemic racism and social injustice. It There is a very strong sense of like this country is so divided, right? And I think what we need now more than ever is like, look, we're really not as divided as you think we are. But I feel like a lot of people when they hear that, especially those that are on either side of the camp, right? They're like, that sounds like a cop out. Like, how can you possibly say we're unified to these people that are so, super far left or super far right? I was talking about this in the first episode where it's like, I think the terms like Nazi or fascist or communist or anarchist, they've been so diluted now where it's like you support one thing on the left or one thing on the right and automatically you're like a socialist or you're a Nazi. And so it's like, how can we, do you feel like it's almost too foregone? Do you feel like there's already too much divisive talk in the zeitgeist of our political discourse that it's really hard to offer a unifying message without being laughed at, or not?
I'm optimistic.
It's a hard one, right?
Yeah, I'm optimistic. It's hard. It's going to be very hard. That's the truth of it, right? And I
Yeah.
think what sort of happened is there's this absurd certainty that everyone speaks with now, because if they allow any sort of little nuance in what they're trying to say or what someone else is trying to sort of dialogue with them about, then they have lost their position, right? And I think that's
Yeah.
a bad way of looking at the world and how to interact with people. To me, it looks like insecurity, and and I think the complicating factor in all this is reality is a complex phenomenon that we only perceive through a lens of our own experiences, right? So there is a reality, right? And
Yeah.
the whole point of conversation, discussion, debate, and sharing information and sharing notes with each other is to triangulate the shape of that reality, right? Like it's a complex shape, right? I see a triangle, Alex sees a circle, you see a square. And if I only believe the triangle exists, then I don't see the actual shape of what it is. And to sort of draw the line, this is what it is, and not try to say, okay, what are the commonalities in what we're seeing, and why are those things common, and then draw conclusions from there. I was having a conversation with someone around this in terms of, I think one thing we struggle deeply, deeply with on a society level is this idea that any differences between people or anything like that, it's like in a very binary way. But when you look at like sort of social science research, what you end up seeing is like on a normal distribution, the differences within groups are always far greater than any difference between groups, right? And so what this means is on the really far edge cases, you might get a distribution that's funky, right? But most of the people are here in the fat center of that distribution, and it doesn't matter the shape of that distribution so much. The concept is right. The median average can be very close, and then the tails can be different. And I think the tails are what get the story, right? Because they're the extreme thing, and that can really sort of distort our understanding of what's going on. And so it's hard to sort of talk through this, right? Because it's a little bit technical and statistics heavy. But if we just sort of say, hey, you know what? We all want the same things. And when we look at those outcomes, we need to look at what's actually common across all of them that is producing this outcome, right? And once we do that, then we actually have something tangible to work with and say, hey, these are things we can do. These are steps we can take that don't feel like this existential crisis of we can never do anything about it. And I think right now that's where we're really struggling with right now is we have this dialogue where I think people are talking past each other. They want
that's a good point.
They want similar things, and they're not talking about the things that they want in common. They're just saying, you disagree with me and you're evil for it. It's like, that's what children do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that there's two really key insights there. And yeah, Chris, to kind of, I guess, crystallize what it seems like you're getting towards, Chris. The first one is Andrew Yang's kind of big platform policy, and that was policy platform, and that was universal basic income. And Unity is not expressly for or against the universal basic income, but there is clearly some association because a lot of the people who came on in the beginning came on in part because Brett had mentioned Andrew Yang as a possible candidate. Mm-hmm. And I think that the key insight with the universal basic income is that the issues that divide us, that we think divide us, are not actually the issues that divide us. The actual issues that divide us are that there are more and more people who are food insecure, more and more people who are unable to, pay for their housing, unable to pay for their student debt. And there are all of these complex issues that have risen recently that make us feel like we're on the farther ends of that distribution curve. And if those things were to be addressed explicitly, we would actually come back more into that happy middle, because all of a sudden, if people, don't feel insecure about student debt, don't feel insecure about their housing or their food, or all of those basic, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, those basic needs that we have, then we're actually able to, in a much more real way, come together and talk about our differences over some more high-level ideological things. It's like people can't, on that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, people can't self-actualize, can't be capable of having that realization that we are in this complex, multi-perspectival reality until they have those base needs addressed. And if they don't have those base needs addressed, they're going to turn to fear, which is what you were speaking to before, Nick. And that fear is kind of the root of the hatred and the anger. And we have to abate that fear at its source, as opposed to trying to just solve the conflict by talking our way out of it.
Yeah. I think one of the issues that exists, I think this is probably the principal problem or challenge we're going to have to overcome, is you have individuals that feel like I can't talk to the other side because they're going to kill me, or they're going to subjugate me, or they're going to deeply oppress me, right? And that happens on both sides, right? You have someone that's on the left. Let's say you're part of the LGBT community, for example. But I can't talk to somebody on the far right. They're gonna freaking they're gonna hate me. Or let's say you're black. I can't talk to some person in deep Mississippi that I know is whose grandfather was part of the KKK. They're gonna hate me. And I think perhaps one of the biggest issues that's happened is that because there's so much nuance out there, right? It kind of has to do with between the individual and the group, right? Where maybe perhaps as a large group, a lot of individuals of a certain type of demographic might think one way or the other, but that doesn't necessarily mean at the individual level that person's going to act like that, right? You might be really surprised, you might not be, but who knows? And I think the major theme we're kind of coming to a head at is this is really all rooted in fear, right? It's rooted in fear of being rejected, fear of being humiliated, fear of being oppressed, and these are all very valid fears, absolutely, right? But in order to really try and make any progress, we all together have to come together and try and overcome those fears. And that's very hard, right? Like that's not easy, especially as someone that's had those fears validated in the past. So I'm curious about, we hear a lot with the Unity movement, why you guys, like we have like what, 96 days until the election, or something like that, maybe 95. why not Unity 2024? Like, why, you know what, like, why can't you just allocate your resources, spend some time in stealth mode, and come out 2024 and sweep everything out, right? Because our main goal is trying to win the 2020 election. That is, like, the central goal of Unity 2020. So how do you guys answer to that? How would you answer to someone that said, why not just wait until 2024?
I'll give a pithy answer. To misquote When Harry Met Sally, why would you wait to start the rest of your life?
Looks like you cut out there.
So
we unfortunately
my
we just had a
my witty response. So I'll repeat it. To misquote
blank.
To misquote When Harry Met Sally, why would you wait to start the rest of your life?
I like that. We got to get that on like a poster somewhere.
Yeah. No, I've sort of seen this as an opportunity to try to like make nice little quotes and we can reuse.
Yeah, no, it's like the if not now when, and yeah, so I think that there's things need to be started when they're started, and we already have started. So we're working for 2020, and whatever this evolves into, in that or beyond that, will be what it is. I wanted to speak for a moment to your comment about fear, Nicholas, because I think that I was watching someone recently. There's a filmmaker named Dia Khan who kind of exemplifies a lot of the very capable, courageous, qualities that we're trying to talk about. And she's a filmmaker. She's an Arab woman. I think she's from Egypt originally, and she's American, or actually she's British, but she came to America and interviewed and worked with people who were neo-Nazis and KKK members and white nationalists. And these are people who, by all measures, she should never associate with. They are those people who would kill her and would harm her. And she was actually able to, through very courageous journalistic, instinct and ability and talent, to go into these communities of these white nationalists and actually have conversations with them and talk to them and engage in this kind of dialogue that we're talking about, and meet them on a human level, ask about their sister and their children, and talk to them about the things that we all have in common. We're all human beings. And through doing this, actually had people who were like leadership in these movements drop the movement and their association with it and come out against it even. And others not drop the movement because it was their community, but have that shift in perspective and consciousness. And I think that that's the most important thing that we can do. Martin Luther King, to quote Martin Luther King, hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. And it's that love is just connecting over the fact that we're all people, we're all existing. And that's really important. And I think that's I hope that's what we're trying to do. And I think that's what we're trying to do. And the more we can do that, I think the more we can get into those even very hairy places of disagreement.
Yeah, I think it really is all about that love. Right? It's recognizing that, look, you look at neo-Nazis. I'm not advocating that we should love neo-Nazis, but the Nazi ideology is one rooted, it's based on fear, right? It's all based off of these wide sweeping assumptions and fear. And it's, so what those individuals really are captured by their own fear, and that's a serious issue, right? Because if we can overcome that fear, then they will begin to, that ideology kind of loses all merit, right? There's no value in a Nazi ideology if you lose that fear over certain groups that you hate. And I think that's so important. And I think that personally, I feel like that's really what the unity movement's all about. It's all about breaking down those assumptions. I mean, it's obviously about more, right? But one of the core values is breaking down those assumptions and just trying to look past, the stereotypical demographics and trying to have those campfire conversations. I mean, on this call right now, you guys, when you submitted your interest in doing it, I think Alex, you called yourself politically progressive, and Chris, you said libertarian. I think that's the way it was structured. We're very different politically here, but yet we can still have these big conversations. We can look past that.
To piggyback with what you're saying about sort of reaching across any sort of perceived barriers, we have to treat each other as individuals, right? First and foremost. I mean, when you bring up neo-Nazis, it's so funny to me in a dark way, I guess, that like the idea that one's identity is intrinsically linked to beliefs that they might hold, culture that they might, practice in, all that stuff is intrinsically linked, right? That is a Nazi belief, and it's like mind-boggling that like we're seeing sort of versions of this idea sort of like propagate where it's like, oh, you're a X, you must believe ABC things, right?
Yeah.
And it's like that's not how people work. Like it's I'm first generation Cuban American. Both my parents were born in Cuba and left. Cuba's got a long history to it, right? Complicated history.
Yeah.
Right. But that's just, that's what it is. And I am, there's a Spanish philosopher that basically says, I am me and my circumstances, right? It's this idea that there's a dialogue between who you are today and the context you find yourself in, and they sort of interact with each other, right? We're all products of who we are and the environments that we come up against, right? And that just, it's this sort of complex adapted phenomenon, right? And to sort of discount all that and say, no, you must believe these things because you look a certain way is, I think, ridiculous, but it's also, it's counter to, I think, what we're here for, right? And like why we can do great things.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. I mean, it's in our diversity as individuals that innovation and new ideas come from, right? We're not all cookie cutter people, right? And that's what makes humanity so amazing. And I think it's also what, not to get into a massive like USA, rant or tangent, but it's what makes America really amazing is that by and large, and again, there are obviously issues where you're in a certain demographic or a certain race or what have you, maybe you have less opportunity space than someone else would, but by and large, this country produces so many eclectic and diverse types of individuals, and we all intersect. You go to New York City, you could have every possible food from every possible corner of this planet, right? And it's that diversity in individuals and in people that is what makes this country so great, and it's what's really important. But if we can, and realizing that for a second, and then coming together and realizing, hey, like, I don't know who you actually might be. You might be a Cuban American, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to like some certain thing people think Cuban Americans are going to like, right? And that's I think that's a huge takeaway, and something I hope we can keep pushing as a movement. I think it's so needed right now. I do want to kind of move on to kind of the last major topic. And it's a big one. I think it's one that we hear probably all the time. And it is the one about candidates. So we hear it. We probably had like thousands of comments about this, and I think it's really fair concern, right? Because we've come out saying, hey, we're trying to get someone to president of the office. Who are we getting to office? But I think what we've really identified in this podcast is that first, before anything, we have to build this groundswell. We have to show people how to kind of operate and how, what nuanced discussion looks like, and kind of helping reframe these important messages of unity. But at some point, we're going to have to try and suggest and offer out candidates. And so I know a lot is in the works that we really can't necessarily talk about. But I would love to hear your guys' thoughts about what an ideal unity candidate looks like. Let's start with Alex.
Okay. Yeah. Well, there's the 3 criteria, right? And I've been thinking a lot about them because I think they're important to unpack because there's so many meanings we ascribe to words. And unpacking them is always the right way to get to sense make what that meaning is. So there's capable, courageous, and patriotic, right? So, and I would open this up to a discussion. It's not just my opinion, but from my own research, highly capable means someone who is able to have a good view of the landscape around them, look at all of the different options in front of them, and make a clear decision, and move forward with that decision. And to quote Napoleon Hill, who's a philosopher and thinker of success and capability, he says that great leaders make decisions very quickly and change them very slowly. And that's one criteria of capability. Another one is to make a decision that actually solves the problem that you're trying to fix. So if we have a president who, sees that poverty is an issue, but makes a decision that actually harms the impoverished people, that's not very capable. He's actually creating, dissent and discord within his own population. So there's a lot of nuance to that idea of capability, and it's important to unpack that. And we know there are people who can do that. There are people who can think in the interest of a broad company, of a broad group of people, and move forward on a clear decision. And that brings you to courageous. And courageous is being able to do that even in the face of special interests or people who might want to do something to harm you or keep you from making the decision that's in the interests of the general population. And then patriotic, I think, is a lot of what we've been talking to here, which is just that recognition that out of many, one, like it's written behind you, Chris. And and it's kind of being able to say, each individual is important in this country and important to the success of this country, and we need to band together and bring out what's best in every individual. So I think those criteria really say it all, and you can go in. I'm just giving little snippets. We could probably have a whole hour conversation about just those three criteria.
I'm curious, one of the things you bring up there I think is so important. Just actually in people in general, right? Is having that humility to recognize, oh, hey, I really care about something and I thought of an idea and it totally didn't work, right? I classically right now you see the Trump administration trying to dwindle down COVID cases, right? To try and kind of not make, we don't want to see a ballooning cases, so we're going to kind of stop and reduce our COVID-19 tests. And that's insane because COVID-19 is still happening, right? And just by not measuring tests doesn't mean it's going to stop. And I think that's a great example of the need for humility, right? Recognizing, hey, I made a mistake. It's okay. And, I'm going to now correct. And I think politically that seems like political suicide, but I guarantee you, so many Americans, if they saw the president get up and be like, hey, I'm really sorry, we made a mistake. We're now going to be doing X, Y, and Z, and we've already started doing it. And here's our transition. I think if you had that transparency, people would love that.
Yeah, and that's hugely courageous to be able to do that.
Huge, absolutely, and it's not easy, but we need it. Chris,
that's actually an interesting example. So I think what Alex was saying in terms of the characteristics that any sort of candidate that we would draft for this, spot on. So I'll just speak to, I think, some of the process that we've been discussing in terms of actually executing on getting a candidate. So part of that, the campfires, we'll be using different software that exists for eliciting comments and feedback and voting. And using those systems as a way of getting polling in order. And we'll describe sort of additional characteristics that we think a good candidate looks like to help sort of help people make decisions around who they want to support. And we're going to have an open sort of poll and have people sort of state what they think, drive that conversation. And then we're looking at probably a short sort of primary process on a specific online platform. They're making sort of like final decisions on. And that primary process will be cool. This will be who's chosen for the Unity platform, and then and those are our candidates, and that's what it'll look like. And we're looking to do that in a very quick turnaround, sort of a fast timeline here, given the reality of mail-in ballots, and that those ballots go out before November, right? So we're in high gear to get this going.
I think, and it's great you bring that up, because one of the things I want to do when we end is like tell people, hey, if you're interested in supporting us and helping, and even kind of informing part of that process, where do you go? And we'll definitely plug that toward the end of the conversation. And it's also super reflective of the volunteer-based structure that we have, right? We're trying to collaboratively identify these traits and characteristics. But I want to definitely keep going off of Alex's point, because I like the discussion of talking about these three core points, right? And what do they actually mean broadly? So I don't know, Alex, if you had a response to what Chris was saying.
So a couple of things come to mind. I think that first, everyone involved in this movement in some way needs to embody those three principles. And I think that's what we've been doing a really great job of coming together around in our volunteer organization. And it continues to be more and more vital, especially if we start getting into some kind of voting procedure over the where we're discussing and creating a consensus. If we can each embody those characteristics, and sometimes, like we were saying, that's the courage to say, okay, the majority rules, and I'm going to keep sticking with this, even though it's not what I agree with. And
also patriotic, right?
That's very patriotic. And so, yeah, I think that's really important. The other thing is not to get too into the deep future, but if we're able to bring together people in this way, in this forum over the internet, and create a polling system where we're actually able to create consensus, there might be iterations of that into the future, but if we're able to do that, we're doing something really huge in terms of learning to communicate and coordinate people from very diverse backgrounds through a common forum over the internet and not in person, which probably, as our society becomes increasingly globalized, will be more and more and more important.
I think we're probably it has to be one of the first movement/campaigns that is completely 100% run digitally right now, right? I mean, I can't think of one that's been... Right. Because you guys are all in California. I'm over by New York, so it's pretty cool, I think, in terms of the tech innovation. We are, again, going back to our first point, we're trying to use this digital ecosystem to our advantage to promote the Unity ideas. But I really like your point, too. It's like, look, if we want to create this really complex movement that supports these ideas, we as individuals also have to embody those ideas. Otherwise, there's no way it can possibly build up. And so I'm curious, when you talk to individuals on your teams, or maybe personally, those three traits, being courageous, capable, patriotic, those are really hard. Those do not come instinctively to some people. I'd say a lot of people. So what do you try to do to embody those? Could you give some suggestions or tips maybe you've used or you've seen other people use to embody those really important traits?
I'll let you go, Alex.
No, go ahead.
Okay. I think one of the key things is one of the ways we defined what a leader looks like within the Unity movement of volunteers is just demonstrating value and being helpful whenever possible. So if you're going to ask someone to do something and delegate out work, you should be willing to do it yourself if it comes to that, right? So just a willingness to do the work is one, and then it might just be that it works out that you can delegate to someone else that can do it just fine or better or whatever, right? But it's the attitude behind it that is, I think, really key there, and just trying to help each other because we're all in this together, right? Like we have to have each other's backs, and I think with those two things, you get all the sort of other emergent qualities you're looking for, right? It's this idea of servant leadership, which is sort of common or like pretty popular among the sort of like project management, program management sort of circles, and different sort of like agile frameworks. It's this idea of servant leadership, and I think that's what we're trying to do. One thing I just want to highlight that I think is very important about what the Unity platform stands for and around the conversation around candidates is it structurally is different, right? It's saying we are putting a structure in the office of a presidency that is about conversation, right? And having the viewpoints well represented, and this idea of steel manning, I think, is very important there. So when people are talking about like, oh, what are the candidates going to be? It's going to be, well, they're going to represent more of what the American people believe in because it's actually two different people that are representing these ideas, right? It's not just one person and then, their clone, essentially, which is how the VP pick is right now, right? It's basically a clone that can sort of capture a different demographic, right? And we're saying, well, no, you can actually use that position to represent a deeper ideal. And I think that is very important to do. And that's something structurally we're doing here. So we have co-leads for each of sort of the working groups to drive at this, right? We really want to have a sense of consensus is being built and disseminated across the organization as decisions are getting made. And we have this idea that like if a lead needs to make a decision and time is of importance, that happens too. So we are incorporating the idea of structures in our platform within our own movement.
Yeah. I think, well, I have just an addition to what you say, Chris, about kind of the leadership from a giving perspective. And I think that actually what we're doing with that is going to be increasingly fundamental to how our society works into the future. We're, as we kind of know, especially in this space, we're approaching this fourth industrial revolution where automation is going to rapidly accelerate, and a lot of people are going to, in some way or another, become less essential to a lot of the base jobs that we have. And that brings with it, hopefully, policies like universal basic income, but it also brings with it a real need for what humans can provide, which is care and innovation and kind of that intrinsic creative value that we have. And what that will mean is that we need to each stand up and give to society at large, the people around us, and create that value or something that's from our own like being. And so that's definitely something that I've tried to embody in this movement, and I've seen a lot of our definitely all of our volunteers and everyone in leadership has done that in a huge way, and it's really inspiring. And then further than that, I would just say that in order to embody those kind of qualities is just listening, just hearing who other people are. And it's been actually fascinating how we've been able to do that. Having never met I've never met either of you. I've never met anybody who's involved in this movement. And just through all of us being able to really listen and hear what people are trying to say and find common ground, like Chris is saying, we really have been able to grow in a really unique way. And and change that structure of how we're doing things, and that's really cool.
But it seems to be really, the title of this episode is going to be called A Plan to Save America. And our plan has a lot of innovation to it, right? We're trying to really promote a unifying message, focusing on not only on the individual, but then for a ground up, collaborative, democratic, complex system. I always like to say, in order to fight a complex system like the political duopoly, you have to also create your own complex system, right?
Yep.
And so we are creating one of the first systems where you have ground up collaboration that is able to synthesize these ideas and values and then place those values onto individuals and then offering this totally new paradigm, which is we're bringing two people into office from two different political backgrounds. They're going to operate as a team. But it's more than that, right? It's not just those two individuals. It's really helping people embody being more capable, patriotic, and courageous. Those three values are really important, and we have to, as a community, as a unity, have to embody those. And so it's really exciting. And I've been part of this movement now for almost about a month, and it's been really great to see how much work has been done. And I hope we've been able to tell everybody the work we've been doing. It's been a lot of work. This has never really been done before. So we're making a lot of great progress. To end, I'd like to kind of have you guys say, so let's say there's a viewer right now that just wrapping this up and they really want to help. They're like, I just found this podcast. I really want to help this movement. Where do they go and how can they help?
Yeah. So number one thing that people can do to help is just share and go to our Facebook, Instagram, Twitter pages, Articles of Unity on all platforms, and just retweet everything, share everything, get the message out there, put your own spin on it, be that leader that we've been talking about.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And then I know we also have a Discord and a Slack. Chris, did you want to talk about the Slack?
Yeah, so you can go to articlesofunity.org. You can sign up to be a supporter, and you'll get opportunities to join as a volunteer, and we'll join the Slack that way. And when you join the Slack, you'll find a couple thousand volunteers there as well, and a lot of different avenues to sort of step in and step up. But I also just want to highlight have conversations with people you know. And as you talk to them about this idea, you might get resistance to, oh, you don't have candidates yet, you don't have policy, like, why should I support this? And all you have to ask them is, are you happy with the choices you have now? Right? And if they say no, which might most likely be the case, that's the support we need, right? If you're just not happy with the choices you're given right now, just join our tent, come in, see what's around, and if the offerings become more appealing over time, great. If not, you lost nothing. So that's how I would present this to other people you're trying to get interested as well.
I love it. Guys, Alex, Chris, thank you very much for taking the time. To our viewers, if you have any questions or feedback, we would love to hear them. You can view us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all the socials basically, as well as YouTube. And you can listen to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, basically wherever they're sold. And every single week, we're going to be doing more of these episodes. So if you have suggestions or ideas as to what you might want to see, feel free. And also make sure I got to do the obligatory like and subscribe. And we will see you next week. All right. Thanks, guys, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
This was great.
Thanks.